Hi guys! This week I am going to be doing another World War II figure for you because I know some people would go nuts probably if I spent too many weeks away from that topic because, you know, modern figures, I know you can't get enough of them. And I'm going to be covering a army that I haven't done yet, and that is Italy. And I have this figure here which I got from Warlord Games. It's part of their bold action range. And you can see I've already base coated him and, you know, painted his skin. I did use Foundry Mediterranean Flesh Triad for this for a change, but you could just as easily use a normal skin triad. It doesn't make much difference. I just thought it would be nice to show something a little bit different. He's been out in the sun, probably in the south, you know, and so he's gotten a little darker. And, you know, some Italians do have slightly darker skin tones, so that's nice to represent, but it's a big country, there's a lot of variation, so you're going to get people with lighter skin tones as well, and that's fine. You can kind of, you know, pick what makes you happy, and if you're not using Foundry, well, you know, you can do that with whatever the paints are that you are using. And as you can see, that was just a standard Italian infantryman, so there's not going to be a lot of tricks or difficulties in painting this uniform, really. I'm really just doing this more for the fact that I know that everyone, or a lot of people, want to just see as many different uniforms and as many different armies as possible, so that, you know, they have sort of a basis, a sort of a basic guide for how to paint standard units in that particular force, which is why I'm doing that. The really only sort of, not really even remarkable, the different thing about, of course, Italian soldiers is that the Italian uniform, it was a very specific color, sort of a mix of blue and green and gray, kind of all at once. It's kind of an interesting color, it's kind of a neat color, I like it, but I can see how some people might be kind of wondering, you know, how can I best reproduce this, how can I, you know, what's the best way for me to simulate this color. I think Vallejo actually makes paint specifically for the Italian uniform, but I'm not even sure about that, because I can remember that when I had to do some of these guys in the past, either they didn't have a color, or if they did, it really wasn't quite right, actually. I didn't think it really reproduced what the color actually looked like. So I guess that's going to be the main focus of this video, is, you know, how to get that kind of right color for the Italian uniforms. And we'll be going over all the usual basics involved in painting sort of a simple khaki uniform, and, you know, sort of the equipment that goes along with that. So I am now just going to start in on this figure. Alright, I'm going to start right in on base coating the uniform, and on reflection I think I may have used a bit more layers of paint here than were probably really strictly necessary for a good result, but on the other hand, the color of the Italian uniform is very specific and can be a little tricky to nail down, and it is a big element here, so I think maybe spending a little extra attention, putting on a few more layers, is probably worth it for an extra good result. So my base coat here is a mixture of black, Vallejo German gray, and some Vallejo German uniform. Obviously there's not very much German uniform in there. This is mostly sort of a black-gray color with a slight greenish cast to it, but it will make a good sort of basic shadow color for all the other layers to build onto. Now, if you are going to skip a layer, this is probably the one you could skip. What I've made here is a mixture of the German gray and the German uniform. I've taken the German gray and mixed the German uniform into it in this case. So what you're getting is a lighter kind of greenish gray shade, and it's not really different from the base, so you could probably omit this and it would not make a whole lot of difference to the finished figure. But if you want to build up some extra value, some extra tone, you know, this is probably a good step to take. Now, while for my previous layers I had taken black or gray and mixed some other colors into it to change the cast, from now on I'm going to use the German uniform as the base color and mix other things into it. So the overall color is going to be lighter that way. So what I've done here, I've taken the German uniform and I have mixed a little German gray in it to darken it down. The other color I'm going to start putting in from this step is Oxford blue. because there's a definite bluishness to the Italian uniform, more so than, say, the German uniforms. There is definitely a similarity between the color of the German uniform and the Italian uniform, but the Italian uniform, in my opinion at least, it's a bit grayer and it's a bit bluer, I guess, more green, more blue in there. So that is sort of my first color that I'm highlighting with, and you can see it's a fair amount lighter than those colors I just applied, but it's still not quite as bright as I'm planning to go here. And the next highlight color now is going to be just a pure German uniform with a little bit of that Oxford blue from Vallejo in there. Oxford blue, by the way, is kind of a darkish blue color, but it's got a pretty distinct gray cast, which makes it a very suitable color when you're doing sort of highlighting, shading work on these types of uniforms where there's often a lot of gray in the fabric. So it's good to sort of mix in color. So the amount I've put in here is not very much. It's quite subtle. You won't see a lot, but it does help. It will darken the color a little bit without using gray, and it's going to add a little extra bluishness. So I'm just going to be applying this all over. From this stage here, I'm really going to be making sure my colors are thin when I apply them so that I can layer them on and get some more, sophisticated tonal ranges here, and especially blending under the legs and areas like that where there's going to be shading. And be sure that you leave all of the creases and folds in the fabric between different elements in the darkest color. That should hopefully go without saying by now, but that's really important that you leave those areas dark so there's good definition. Now we're really going to start lightening the uniform up. You can really see the difference. What I've done here is I've taken that German uniform, and instead of using the Oxford blue, because I really want to start getting lighter now instead of darker, I have mixed in Vallejo pale blue, and that's a very white blue color. I'm not sure how to best describe it. Anyway, not exactly a baby blue, but very, very light, a little bit of gray to it. But that way I can be lightening up my color for these lighter highlights, but at the same time getting some blue into that, getting a more stronger blue cast, because German uniform is quite a nice green color, I think, but I think the Italian uniform needs a bit more blue in it, which is why I'm using that there as my sort of lightening color instead of, say, white or a cream color or whatever. And you can see this is again thinned down quite a bit, and I'm applying it and blending it outwards, and it's really brightening the uniform up, lightening it a lot, and this is really going to be for adding all of those highlights where light is hitting. And this color is going to be probably the most important for really giving the uniform sort of its final color cast. And the very final highlight in the uniform is basically the same thing, but I've mixed even more of that pale blue color in there to get it even lighter, even bluer. And I'm going to be applying this quite a bit more carefully. I'm going to be using it sort of as an edge highlight. So I'm going to be applying it sort of along all the edges and fine detail areas, and then blending it out a little bit from there as needed, like on the knees, for example, and on the tops of creases, all those usual areas that you want to be extra bright and where you want to put extra emphasis. But you should be definitely more sparing with this color because it's quite a bit lighter. It needs to be blended out, applied in small amounts, because a lot will go a long way, especially when you're blending it. But this is now basically the color I want the uniform to be. And I found German uniform to be a great base for this. Interestingly, I don't like German uniform for German uniforms. I actually use a field gray color for German uniforms. What I don't like about the German uniform color is it's a bit too green, I find. A little bit too blue, a little bit too green, a little bit too minty, actually. I think it's maybe meant to simulate sort of an earlier period of German uniforms when the color was slightly different. But anyway, I think if you're trying to get a rough approximation of sort of an overall general German uniform, it's not the best color to use. So, it's not good for that, but I find for the Italian uniform, it's actually ideal because they had a uniform that was much bluer, much greener. So it's a much more suitable color to work from there, though, of course, as you see, you do need to add other colors into it. It's not quite perfect as is. But I do recommend that as a sort of like a good general color for that purpose. And there's a lot of variation, I should say, in the Italian uniform cloth. I looked around online a lot. It's kind of hard to find sources online actually for Italian uniforms. It's not something that gets posted a lot. There are a couple ospreys, but I don't have either of them, so you know that made my life a little bit more difficult. But you see a lot of variety. You see uniforms that are very dark gray green. You see others that are more this sort of minier green, like I'm doing mine. And I've even seen some that were really distinctly blue looking. They looked almost like a Luftwaffe uniform. They were so blue. So there's a lot of room for variation here. So you know you can kind of adjust it to your taste. And if you don't have to feel like there's one right way that you need to be painting these guys. Now I'm going to move on to sort of the black and gray areas on this uniform. And you might have noticed that the color of the cloth may look kind of a bit different from the last step. And I haven't done anything to it, I swear, but it's because I'm doing this particular part of the painting much later in the day, so it's dark out, so the lighting has changed, and that's why the uniform looks a little bit different. So, you know, just so you realize that. But anyway, I want to base coat all the black and gray areas with just black paint, and that includes his boots here, his putties. He's got a little bit of belt showing there on the side, and he's also got a sheath for a knife on his other side. It's barely showing, but you want to paint that too. And I'm also going to do the straps on his bedroll in this black color. He may also, depending on your unit, the belt may be more exposed, and they often have sort of leather packs for ammo and stuff, but you can't see them on this guy, but those would also be sort of black too. So after everything has been painted a base black color, I'm going to start highlighting just with German gray, and that's going to go on really all of these areas. Nothing special, just pick out pretty much everything, leave the really black as sort of a definition in between the putties and the lines and seams in his shoes, that kind of thing. Next, I'm going to then continue highlighting by mixing just a bit of Vallejo neutral gray in, but not too much because I don't want to highlight my black areas too high. I want them to stay distinctly black. But I'm going to put a little neutral gray in there, and I'm going to use that to lightly highlight the shoes and the belt and the scabbard, but I'm not going to go too overboard on that because I want them to stay darker. Now the wrappings are another story. I want them to be a bit lighter, a bit more gray. So I'm going to continue highlighting those by taking some German camouflage pale brown, I think it's pale brown, and mixing that in to get a very clear gray, brown color. You can see I'm doing it there. You want it to, have a really distinctly brown cast, and I'm going to use that to continue highlighting the putties so they get sort of a brownish wool fabric kind of look to them. You can put a little bit on the tips of the shoes too if you want to show some wear, but not too much. You really should just use this on the putties because you really want to highlight it higher. You want it to look different, a slightly different color from the black leather areas. Another thing you're going to want to consider is his collar. I didn't paint this yet. I went back and did it later because I kind of forgot about it, but the collar, these Italian soldiers wore a shirt under their uniform jacket, and it was black or kind of gray. And then their uniform jacket had very wide lapels, but the undershirt collar usually kind of stuck out over top. So if you're smart, you'll do that now too, and you'll paint that collar, and you'll see I'll have mine painted later. You're going to want to paint that color also using these blacks and grays, and just take care of that right now because it should also be a similar shade on these Italians. The water bottles and various canvas equipment carried by these guys was a sort of different shade from the uniform. It was also sort of greenish, but it was different. So in order to make that here, I'm going to be using a base coat of Vallejo black, green, and a German field gray World War II. So I want a nice dark base shade, and I'm using that to coat his water bottle, this sort of pouch on his side, his bedroll I'm going to do in that color, and then also he's got some cross straps over the front of his uniform, which are sort of what are holding the water bottle and that pouch on, so they should be painted in that color too. And then next I'm going to take just pure German field gray World War II and apply that as sort of a second highlight to these areas and put it on pretty generously and just sort of blend it outwards from the middle of all of these portions so that you keep some darker regions on the equipment. To highlight that canvas equipment, I have taken a little bit of Boneyard Light from Foundry and mixed that into the German Field Grey World War II, and now I'm just going to start applying that to the high areas, all the tops of the wrinkles, along the edges of all the equipment, in the sort of the central areas, kind of blending out from there. And of course on things like the straps on the front of his uniform, you don't have to worry about that too much. You can just put it all the way along there, pretty much just making sure that you leave some nice dark defining lines in between the straps so that, you know, you can see where the edges of them are. But this paint is fairly thin too, so I can layer it a little bit and build up some extra tone this way. But you can see that it gets these areas, gets them reasonably light and well highlighted, but then, you know, without, you know, really overdoing it. And, you know, you can even choose to do multiple highlights here. Like here you can see I've gone on and added even more Boneyard into that color to get an even higher highlight on specific areas, like sort of the edges and stuff. And you may want to do that too. You'll have to decide, you know, how light you want this equipment to look, because this is another area or another thing where there would have been substantial variation in the color from one person to another. Now let's do the backpack. Now the backpack was a little bit different. It was a totally different shade from the rest of the uniform. It was kind of more of a brownish, traditional khaki color. So I'm painting it here using a mixture of German camouflage pale brown and Vallejo khaki, with more of the brown in here in this case. And I'm going to paint both the backpack, the straps holding that sort of tarp, and also just the backpack straps going around the front using this base color. And then once I've got that on there, I'm going to take Agrex Earthshade Wash and apply that too, just to darken things down a little bit, you know, and get even better contrast down the recesses. And then I'm going to start highlighting the back, but first I'm just going to start out by taking pure Vallejo khaki and applying that. And it's going to, the only places I'm really not putting this color are sort of down in the edges where, you know, I want some lines sort of defining the colors or the different areas a little bit. You can thin this a bit too, of course, and do a little bit of blending. I would recommend here that you put the highest color towards the bottom, the brightest color, and then sort of blend upwards so it's a little darker, a little bit more shadowed, sort of underneath where that flap closes, because that's going to look more natural, and put plenty of highlight sort of on the very top of that backpack flap, obviously. And then I'm going to continue by making a light highlight, and I'm going to do that by mixing the Boneyard Light into my khaki until I get a substantially lighter shade. It's going to get a little bit yellow even, and that's fine. And I'm going to really use that then to pick out sort of along the top, so all the strapping, all of the closures. There's kind of a seam running around that backpack bottom, and you're going to want to pick that out carefully. I'm going to apply it there too, on the base of the backpack, sort of blend it outwards and upwards so that you get some, looks like you really got some light hitting there, and especially along that top flap, because that area is obviously going to be really bright on given how he's carrying this piece of equipment. Now for the sort of tarp he's carrying. Now, I said this uniform was going to be pretty straightforward, but I'm going to be doing a little bit of a detail thing here. This is sort of a tarp, poncho, whatever. It's very much like what the Germans had, in that it was made out of camouflage material, and it would be painted in Italian camouflage, which is what we're going to be doing here. Now, this is just a really small area, so you're not going to see very much of it, but I think it's a nice detail, and I will be covering Italian camouflage more extensively in a future tutorial, how you can you know, do more with that. But what we're going to do here, sort of as a base, I've taken the German Field Grey World War II and applied that, and now I'm applying the Coelia Green Shade Wash from Citadel over top of that to get more dark color into the recesses, and also, you know, just to get a little more green into the whole thing as well. To highlight, I have taken the Field Grey and I've mixed some of that pale blue color into it just to lighten it up, because I noticed sort of the base, and at least the example I was looking at was kind of a minty green color. And this, I should say again, this is another thing where there's a huge variation, the colors, the range of colors in Italian camouflage, so it can be all over the place depending on the example and the batch that was made. So you don't have to feel like there's one right way once again. But anyway, I've got this sort of minty light green. I'm going to use that to highlight the base for the camouflage tarp. Now I'm going to start adding the spots. Now, Italian camouflage is a pretty easy, simple camouflage to paint. It has a lot of large, hard edge shapes, only 2 colors over the base. Which consists of a brown and sort of a pale yellowy cream color and in smaller proportions. The brown spots I am making here by mixing German camouflage black brown and the German camouflage pale brown, sort of into a medium brown color, I guess. And I'm going to put pretty large areas. The brown spots on this Italian camouflage should be in a higher concentration than the other yellow spots we're going to add later. You can make pretty big areas, and I'm just going to apply that, and then I'm going to highlight it using the same color but add in a bit more of that pale brown to lighten it up. And you can then even add a really high highlight if you want, of just pure pale brown, because these camo patterns always look a lot nicer when you can get a good variation in the color and really highlight your spots. And now, of course, the brown areas are definitely the biggest on this uniform, but then there would also be sort of pale, light, whitish cream or even yellow spots in a smaller concentration. My example I saw had very yellow spots, and this is not necessarily common that they were this yellow, but there was so much variation in Italian camouflage and how it looked that could happen. I am using Foundry Raw Linen Medium here because just about the right kind of yellowish color. And these yellow spots should always be much less than the brown spots, always much smaller, fewer, and they should always be in the middle of or adjacent to a brown area, as far as I can tell at least. They should never be off on their own, they should never get too big, and they should always be touching a brown area. So I base coated them with the raw linen medium, then I've mixed some of that boneyard light into the color to lighten it up, and I'm going to use that then to just quickly highlight those lighter spots. Now I'm moving on to the rifle stock. I am base coating this using a bay brown shade from Foundry. Just get that all over and make sure you don't leave out any spots. And then in order to highlight, I'm going to do something a little bit differently. Usually, if you watch my videos, you know I tend to highlight gun stocks using chestnut shade and chestnut medium from Foundry, but I want to mix things up just a little bit here just to keep things interesting. So instead of using chestnut, I'm going to start out highlighting this gun with spear shaft shade, which is a little bit of a different color. It looks quite similar, but it's a little bit more yellow, I guess, a little bit less red. Chestnut is a more red shade, so this will give you a more yellow gun. So I'm going to give that a fairly strong but blended overall highlight of the chestnut shade. And then I'm going to, or not chestnut, sorry, I just said so, the spear shaft shade color. And then I'm going to take that spear shaft medium color, and I'm going to start applying it to, and I'm going to apply it, though, again, more along just the edges and along, you know, where the metal divides from the wood, all those things. And you can see I should make it strong along the edges and sort of blend it out from there. And you can see also the top is getting extra emphasis because that's where light would be hitting. There aren't very many metal areas on this figure, and they're mostly on the gun. So I'm going to be doing this in the way that I usually would. So I'm making a base coat here, which is a mix of German gray and a little bit of Vallejo Air gun metal, but mostly the dark gray, just slightly metallic. I'm going to base coat all the metallic parts on the gun. The only other area you might want to worry about is you might want to just do a little indication of metal on the top of his dagger handle if it's where it's showing or that, you know, or maybe a little dot on his buttons, but, you know, you don't really have to worry about it. But I'm just going to be base coating all those areas real quickly. Then I'm going to make a sort of a highlight by mixing more of that gun metal into the color I already have to lighten it up slightly, but still want to keep it dark because gun hardware is never very bright on these modern pieces. So just a little bit more, and then you can then finally take a little bit of just pure gun metal if you want, just to add some highlight, really bright highlights to the areas where there'd be a lot of wear. Alright, here is our sort of basic, finished World War II Italian infantryman. I have to admit, I wasn't really looking forward to this figure when I started. I thought I wasn't going to really like painting him, and I wasn't going to like having to figure out that sort of specific color, but I think it worked out pretty well in the end. And the beauty of this guy, these Italians, is that there seems to have been a lot of variation in sort of the shades that these uniforms came in, so you don't have to feel like you have to just nail one specific color or the whole thing is going to come out wrong. You've got a big range of sort of blue, green, gray that would be completely acceptable for this uniform. And I suspect if you had an Osprey or a better source to look at than I did, you would find this process even easier. I also ended up giving you that bonus little bit on painting Italian camouflage, which I didn't have planned at the beginning, but I hope that was useful. I know it's kind of a small area, so you don't really get a very good sense of the camouflage, but at least you get some idea of the general makeup and the colors. And I definitely will be doing another tutorial on it in the future. It's a fun, easy pattern to paint, and it was actually worn a lot by the Germans. For whatever reason, German officers really liked Italian camouflage, and especially SS guys tended to have custom uniforms made of it. It wasn't standard issue, but they would get the fabric, they would have the uniforms made, and that was apparently perfectly acceptable, and it was just a popular look for whatever reason. So we can do it again later in a bigger area, and we definitely will. Probably on a German that time, because like I said, they like to really make whole pieces of their uniforms out of this fabric. And it's another nice, easy pattern you can do on your Germans if you want some more extra variety, but you are intimidated or don't want to deal with some of the harder things like pea pattern and, oak leaf pattern and things like that I've shown you before. But yeah, we'll cover that later on. I'm not sure when. Anyway, once again, if you enjoyed this video, please like it, please share it with your friends, and you can always leave me comments, of course, because I love hearing from you. Let me know what you thought about this tutorial, what you liked, what you didn't like, if you have ideas for future videos, of course, that's always really appreciated. And, of course, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, so you can really keep up with what I'm working on and when, new videos come out. So, I think that's all for now, and I will see you next week.